Welcome to the Holy Post. How did American politics go from a disagreement over policies to become a war between the forces of good and evil? Today, Phil takes us on a journey through the fascinating origins of the new Apostolic Reformation movement. He's going to trace a line from a professor at Fuller Seminary in the 1980s all the way to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Along the way, we learn how this movement popularized the integration of culture, politics, and spiritual warfare and shaped the imaginations of an entire generation of evangelicals. Plus, the Chinese spy balloon is a Rorschach test in the sky, and scientists are doing some pretty creepy things to mice at a children's hospital in Cincinnati. Before we get into the episode, I got some good news. Last month, we had Dr. Amy Peeler on the show to talk about women and the gender of God. That was episode 543. That interview was so interesting and it sparked so much feedback from our listeners that we invited Dr. Peeler back for another conversation with Caitlin. That bonus interview is now available exclusively for Holy Post supporters. To get access to it, along with more bonus interviews, exclusive shows like Getting Schooled by Caitlin Chess and Christian Asks, and the Holy Post Book Club, monthly live streams with me and Phil, and free Holy Post merchandise, you'll want to sign up to become a supporter today. Go to holypost.com and click Support Us to learn more. Okay, one last note. The first few minutes of this episode, I had some issues with my microphone. My audio is a little bit wonky, but it only lasts for a few minutes. Sorry about that, but hopefully it doesn't distract you too much. Okay, here is episode 550, Demons, Democrats, and Dominionists. Oh my.
Hi there, welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. This is Phil Vischer. I am here with Sky Jitani. Hi, Sky.
Hello, Phil.
Hi, and Christian Taylor, who is not, I am not Christian Taylor.
I am Christian Taylor. Good to see you.
Christian
and I'm
Taylor
not hosting
Christian
this podcast.
Taylor.
It's not my podcast.
No, you're not hosting, and I'm not impersonating you. I tried.
No, but it's nice to know I'm in your head, Phil.
Totally, rent-free in my head. And now it's time for the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian.
So, what was the biggest news of the last week? By far, biggest news of the last week.
The Chinese balloon.
Balloon!
Yes.
Balloon! And when was the last time the whole nation stopped to watch?
Was watching a balloon?
To watch a single object. Just.
Well, it was interesting in a boring news cycle of Februariness.
It was. Yeah, I believe, because I was debating, should we mention the balloon? But everybody, it galvanized the whole nation. We all, it's like when something happens, the boy falls down the well and then all America stops everything to see if we can get the boy out of the well. Remember that?
That's true.
Was that in
That's
the
true.
80s?
Except it was a girl. It was a little baby girl.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay.
I apologize. I think it was a Rorschach balloon. That's my theory. Because what you saw in it said a lot about your assumptions.
Ooh, that's good, Phil.
What were some of the things people saw in it, Phil?
Well, it really depended on your view of the current administration.
Yeah.
Your view of China's rise and or American decline.
World geopolitical.
Yeah. And also your view of what the average American could accomplish with a shotgun. It kind of told us something about that. It's like, if it comes over my house, I'm taking it out. No, you're not.
I just don't understand why they had to explode it with a missile. Why couldn't they just have put a little hook on it? Wouldn't it have been a lot better
How
if they
would
just
you put a hook on it?
Well,
Christian
they
Taylor.
They do this all the time where they fuel up in flight. In 1944, they would drag, gliders along behind them. I mean, they have this ability
at 65,000 feet. At 65,000 feet, you could which we only have one plane that can go that high. And
I am sure they could figure out some way to tow it back in. I have seen Star Trek. I know there are things as traction beams. I was just watching it on The Mandalorian.
Oh my gosh. Wait a minute. What would be the point of dragging it back in?
Because then you don't have it all like in pieces and have to fish for it in the ocean. Like it's all in one piece. You can see what's in there and, makes life a lot easier.
So you're thinking that a plane that's traveling at, 500, 600, 700 miles an hour could hook it with a hook, a balloon that's going maybe 150 miles an hour.
Okay, well, when you put it like that, maybe it's not possible. But what if we could get in an air balloon ourselves and one of those beautiful baskets, go all the way up there and just hook it in?
You can't breathe at 60,000 feet.
Yeah, but you could bring oxygen.
Yeah.
True.
And then what? And then you jump out of the side of your balloon like that one skydiver.
That would be cool. You could parachute out of that basket.
The Canadians once lost control of a weather balloon, similar kind of balloon, and so they attempted to shoot it down. Do you know how many bullets it took? They fired about 1,000 rounds into the weather balloon. And even then, it took 6 days for it to come down because it was just deflating slowly. So
you're saying that a rocket was entirely the thing to do?
Here's the deal. Here's what we had to do, which was why it was kind of tricky. We wanted it. The debris from hitting it with a missile covered about 6 miles. So you don't want to scatter debris over 6 miles of just random American territory because then you kill somebody and then that doesn't look good. But you also can't, so you need to let it go off the coast, but you can't let it leave territorial waters or you don't have the right to pick it up anymore. So they literally had to bring it down. I think territorial waters are 16 miles or something like that. And this was,
it's 12, isn't it 12?
12. So they had to bring it, and it was 6 miles worth of debris scatter. So they had to bring it down so close to shore. Also, they didn't want it to go down in, 1,000 feet of water where they could never get it. So it was actually a fairly delicate operation. But it was either, depending on your perspective, an example of Joe Biden's incompetence and American weakness, or if you like the current administration, it was an example of self-control and thoughtful rationality. And then when he shot it down, it was like, oh, we did the right thing. We shot it down. Yay, we're tough. Or too late. We're still weak.
Hasn't it come to light that there were multiple Chinese balloons during the Trump administration that we did nothing about?
Is that true or false? Like I was I was thinking maybe that's a false friend. Maybe they just are throwing it out there.
Yeah, I didn't want to jump on that bandwagon and say, see.
This guy's going to look it up.
Yeah, look it up. Do we know that for sure? And the Chinese have acknowledged that a balloon currently traveling over South America is also theirs. So they're just letting balloons loose all over the place to see.
Really, of course, I have a theory that, maybe they're floating a test balloon to see what we'll do.
It's a test balloon or a Tesla balloon.
To see how quick we can scramble our jets, to see how quick we will respond.
So this is from Bloomberg. 3 Chinese balloons flew over U.S. during Trump presidency. Trump wasn't offered a chance to shoot them down at the time, and intelligence officers are going to brief the country about that soon. Trump, of course, has already tweeted or truthed or whatever that's called that he denies that there were ever any balloons over the U.S. during his administration.
Sure. I never let a balloon come into my airspace. I'm
right.
Donald Trump. Okay.
So this is apparently not a new event. I wonder if it would have gone largely ignored if there were larger news items in the headlines the last couple days.
Well, rural Montanans spotted it.
Yeah, that's how it started.
That doesn't mean it gets widely reported, or it could have whatever. And then here's the other thing that no one's really talking about.
Yeah.
Does anyone really doubt that the U.S. is spying like crazy on China all the time, whether with balloons or satellites?
Yeah, but we use satellites like you're supposed to. Satellites, Guy.
Well, maybe
use
we're
lots
using balloons
of other
too.
methods. We still have spies on the ground. Like, come on now. We have spies everywhere.
We're a Christian nation. We do not believe in subterfuge.
Okay.
Isn't that what?
And why do the Chinese need
the Bible says?
Spy balloons when they have TikTok?
Yeah, I know that was a big.
Did you hear that TikTok, Apple, and Google, I think, are demanding that it be taken off of the I mean, the government's demanding that Apple and Google take it out of their stores.
Yeah, they don't like TikTok.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
well, I tell you, it is probably dangerous.
It's probably dangerous, and I'm sure it's not affecting the next generation at all, even if they're not being spied on by the Chinese.
Their minds are not
Party.
being melded, right?
Yeah, we had this conversation with my kids and my wife last night because my son was trying to convince them that the balloon didn't really matter because of TikTok in our pockets. And she wanted to know, well, like, what are they spying on me for? What do they want to know about me? What are they going to do to me? And we were trying to wrestle through. No, it's more just information about the body politic in general, not really what Lisa Vischer is cooking for dinner on any given Tuesday night is of less interest to the CCP. Now, Amazon, on the other hand, is highly interested in what you're cooking for dinner because they're going to recommend the ingredients next week.
I saw you put something on Twitter today of about Twitter, and then 10 minutes later
about Amazon.
About Amazon, yeah. So what was that?
Yeah, well, they keep suggesting that I buy things again that I bought several years ago, and because I did a puppet video several years ago, and I needed a prop. I needed a lamb, so I remember that I bought a stuffed lamb, a little lamb plush, cute little thing. And then for like days and days, Amazon algorithms were saying, "You want another lamb? You want another lamb? You need another lamb? Don't look at this lamb. You're the guy that likes lambs, right? Here's another lamb." And then it kind of went down. But then just today, they say, "Hey, you ready for another lamb?" 2 years later, you're probably due another lamb. And so I tweeted about that. Like, why do they randomly go into my history, my sales history, and pick an object and then see if I want to buy the same thing again?
Because
within 10 minutes, my tweet
got another lamb.
My tweet got a response from Amazon
really?
On Twitter with instructions for how to change my recommendations from someone named Tasha.
Interesting.
And now I'm freaking out because Tasha be watching me.
Not only are they watching your shopping habits, they're following you on Twitter.
I know, it's scary.
Okay, before we leave this, can we go back to the balloon for a second?
We shot it, Sky. We shot the balloon.
And like the whole Amazon algorithm, all that sort of stuff, like we are being monitored all the time. Like privacy is a huge issue with all these devices and all the websites and algorithms and tracking and cookies and blah, blah, blah. But this stupid balloon made so much press. And I think it's a case of like TV bias because you can film a balloon. You can show images of people pointing up at the sky at the balloon. But the algorithms and the Alexas and all that kind of stuff, like, no, it's not good TV. So
right.
Is it a case where we're really overlooking what is the far greater espionage and surveillance reality of our world in favor of something that's just a shiny object on a television screen?
It's not China. It's big corp.
Well, and some of those big corps are in China, or they're the Chinese government, like TikTok. So it's all interrelated. But we don't film stuff. If it doesn't make for good TV, we pretend it's not an issue.
You had to go away to change your mic because you were using the wrong mic, and now you're using the right mic, so you sound better. We apologize, everyone, for having to listen to Sky on his AirPods.
It was Chinese interference.
Yes, it was the balloon. We blame the balloon. So do you have, I know a lot of pastors were searching for sermon illustrations out of the balloon drama fiasco.
He just gave us one. Gave us one.
What was your sermon illustration? Yeah, it was before we started recording, though. What was it?
Before we were recording?
No, or was that something else? Was it an illustration about something else?
The sermon illustration is we're focused on what we can see that we think will harm us, while we are not focusing on what actually can harm us. And if you want to see how that relates spiritually, it's sin. We're focusing on, like you talked about last week, the morality and all these other things that are going to bring us down as Christians, but we're not really looking at the sin that's inside of us.
That's right. We are focused on the balloon in China's eye rather than the algorithm in our own.
There you go. He can put it so much better than I can. That's why he gets the big bucks.
Or we are focused on the material world when the real danger is in spiritual warfare and demons.
Look at you too.
The general demons fighting against each other like this present darkness.
We could make different applications for different denominational theologies, right? So the Pentecostals have theirs and the Reformed folks have theirs. And so there's lots to use here.
Yeah, the balloon is the balloon Luther in the Reformed theology, or was the missile Luther and the balloon was the Pope? I think that was probably it.
Right.
The missile of Reformation. And now we had to go offshore, off the coast of North Carolina to recover sola scriptura from the depths, and solo fide, and solo, whatever the other, solo.
Gracia.
Okay, we need to take a quick turn through the world of animal news.
Yay!
And also, yes, animals
news.
And science that may be questionable. Scientists grow mini human guts inside mice.
What?
Tiny organoids with working immune systems mimic the functions of the GI tract. You know what a GI tract is, right? It's not general infantry. What does it stand for?
Gastrointestinal.
Gut. Yes, that's it.
Yes, thank you. Gastrointestinal. The largest part of the immune system in a human being is the GI tract. Did you know that?
Yeah, because it starts in your esophagus, it goes all the way down and wraps around 1,000,000 times, and really, if it's stretched out, could go around the world.
Yeah.
It's that big.
Yeah, it starts with your mouth, actually. Our biggest exposure to the world is what we put in our mouth. So says Michael Helmrath, a pediatric surgeon at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center, who treats patients with intestinal diseases. So first, I just have to point out that this really weird research that they're doing on mice is happening in a children's hospital in Cincinnati. That's a little creepy. Okay.
That is.
Sometimes this system malfunctions or doesn't develop properly, which can lead to gastrointestinal conditions like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, and celiac, all of which are on the rise worldwide. Studying these conditions in animals can only tell us since their diets and immune systems are very different from ours. So we either have to study them in humans or we have to put human parts inside animals, which sounds more fun if you're a scientist.
Putting human parts in animals.
But how do they put human parts inside a mouse, given mice are very small?
Sky, that's a good question.
It is.
Let's find out, shall we? In search of a better method, Helmrath and his colleagues announced that they had transplanted...
Did you say Helmrat?
No, it's close. Helmrath. They had transplanted tiny three-dimensional balls of human intestinal tissue into mice. Remember when we talked about brain organoids?
Yes, creeped me out.
The little human brain organoids were starting to grow eyes on their own and freaking everybody out. Mm-hmm. Okay, these are intestinal organoids, tiny three-dimensional balls of human intestinal tissue. They put them into mice in the general vicinity of their kidneys. After several weeks, these spheres, known as organoids, developed key features of the human immune system. The model could be used to mimic the human intestinal system without having to experiment on sick patients. So, we are growing human GI tracts inside mice.
But do they then take it out of the mouse and it continues to grow?
No.
How?
It stays small. It's either that or the mouse explodes.
So basically, they're putting human tissue inside of a mouse. So then, as the mouse eats different things or is exposed to different things, they can see what effect it has on the human tissue. Is that the idea?
The human organoid GI tract is not connected to the mouse GI tract. It's just loose. It's just loose in the mouse, but it grows all the things that you have in the GI tract that are part of the immune system. So then I guess you can inject different things into the little organoids, and I don't know how that works exactly, but they're very excited about it, and it's happening at a children's hospital, which freaks me the heck out.
Okay.
What's behind this door, kids? Oh, this is where we care. This is where we keep the mice with human stomachs. Yeah. Behind this door.
And why should we care about this, really? And seriously,
I thought you liked animal news.
Well, Christian. I do, but this is kind of depressing, weird animal news. I don't know. I do kind of feel bad for the mice.
Yeah,
they got weird things rolling around in them.
You're hanging out with your mice friends, and you say, "I have a stomach ache," and they say, "Oh, really? What's going on?" And say, "I don't know, but it's not my stomach. It's that other one."
I got some organoids floating around near my kidney.
I got a stomach ache in my human stomach, guys. What should I do? But maybe it'll make the mice better cooks, like Ratatouille. If they
maybe
human Okay.
Good theory. Do we have any real news
museum.
today?
I mean, a children's hospital.
A children's museum.
Thinking of where the kids do experiments.
A children's zoology museum.
We sure are having some fun at the Children's Museum today, aren't we, kids? Put down the Legos and pick up your organoids. Okay. Last week we talked about the rise of spirit warriors on the Christian right. And we had some of our Pentecostal or charismatic friends write in and say, hey, that wasn't a very good representation of Pentecostalism or charismaticalism. So could you have, real Pentecostals and charismatics on to talk about it? And the goal, I have to say, was not a study of Pentecostalism or charismaticality. I'm not sure what the proper...
That's not a word.
I know, but I'm going to go with it anyway. We were talking about
you're proving their point a little bit, Phil.
Wow, that stings.
Sorry,
that really stings.
Anyway, what were you saying?
So we weren't really talking about Pentecostalism in general or the charismatic movement in general. We were talking about a very specific offshoot called the New Apostolic Reformation, which is actually an offshoot of independent charismatic movements. And a couple people.
It's not a denomination, just to clear this up. It's not like it's just a way of thinking or a movement.
It is an actual movement that was started by one actual person. So it has that aspect to it. And I had a couple people write in and say, hey, Phil, you need to listen to this podcast series. There's a podcast called Straight White American Jesus, which is like two religion scholars who were ex-evangelicals who were kind of dissecting American evangelicalism. And they did a 7-part podcast series on it's called Charismatic Revival Fury, and it's really about the whole history of the New Apostolic Reformation, which started, so it helped me kind of connect
1900s?
No.
When did it start?
It started with C. Peter Wagner at Fuller Seminary in the 1980s.
Yeah, who's somewhat infamous or famous, depending on how you see it, for something completely different. He developed the homogeneous growth principle.
Yes, which said churches grow faster if everyone is the same.
Right. And
that's a good thing?
Well, hold on. He and I forgot who his partner was in the research. They developed that as an observation. They were just observing that churches that are homogeneous grow quicker. And then that got quickly adapted by the megachurch movement, not as an observation, but as a prescription, saying that if you want your church to grow quick, then only target one kind of person and make sure that the congregation is homogeneous. So that became the kind of marching orders throughout the 80s and 90s and early 2000s for megachurch world. And then slowly they caught up with, well, maybe diversity is important and we should do something about that.
But here's what I wanted to talk about, because you can draw a direct, if confusing, line from C. Peter Wagner at Fuller Seminary in the 1980s to the Capitol riot in 2020.
What? How is this wiggly line happening?
You want to hear about it?
Of course, that's why I'm asking.
Christian, would you like to hear about it? Would you like Uncle Phil to tell you a little story?
Please, Uncle Phil, please.
Okay. C. Peter Wagner was teaching at Fuller Seminary. This is my shorthand version. Okay, you can go listen to the whole 7-part podcast series if you want. It's like 7 hours, maybe more. C. Peter Wagner was teaching church growth. At the same time, he was getting very interested and involved in the Vineyard movement, which was founded by a guy named Wember, which was a more charismatic movement that had a heavy emphasis on things like healing and speaking in tongues and the gifts of the Spirit. Wagner got so interested in that he started inviting Wember to come in to Fuller Seminary and teach classes on intercessionary prayer and healing prayer, where they were actually, trying to learn how to do miracles in the classroom. The very kind of stuff that you see today at like the Bethel School of Prayer and Healing Ministry in Redding, California. So he started running with that idea. Peter Wagner started running with that idea and getting more excited about that world of independent charismatic stuff. He started promoting the idea that the church went awry when we stopped believing that God anointed prophets and apostles. And he believed that the true leadership of the church wasn't supposed to be elders, wasn't supposed to be a senior pastor. The true leadership of the church was supposed to be apostles and prophets.
Okay.
He ended up taking that idea so far that Wember, the founder of the Vineyard, eventually backed away from him and said, "You're going a little too far with this." So Wagner left. He retired from Fuller, and he started a new movement. The New Apostolic Reformation is what he called it, which was, he said, the most important change in church governance since the Protestant Reformation with Luther. It's the new one with Wagner. So
that's a big claim.
It's quite a claim. So he's the new Luther. And Sky just went away, and he's coming back.
Yes,
Hi, Sky. Welcome back. So good to see you. So he started one group that was an association of prophets. He started another group that was an association of apostles.
Is this like a Facebook group or something?
Kind of, but no, before Facebook. And then he started another group that was just for him to mentor a very elite bunch of prophets and apostles.
Now, is he saying that he's a prophet?
He's an apostle.
Apostle, okay.
But he has friends that are prophets, and there's one woman, I forget her name, who's his primary prophet. So this led to a lot of prayer ministries and a lot of prophetic announcements about various places. As it developed more, they started developing the idea that there is a demon or a spirit over each nation on earth, and that if you wanted to try to reach that nation for Christ, you first needed to do spiritual warfare against the controlling spirit of that nation or area. So he also developed the idea of the 1040 window, and that we needed to do major evagelism to reach people in the 1040 window.
That's where the 1040 window came?
Yes. He believed that the 1040 window, because most of it is Asia, of the population that's been unreached. And he felt it was so hard to grow Christianity there because it was controlled by a certain spirit was over that area who was very strong. And then everyone's having visions. Like, I had a dream.
This sounds like Frank Peretti, gone amok.
Very Frank Peretti gone wild. So they decided that that Asia was under the control of a spirit that was headquartered on Mount Everest. So they actually put together a little group of prophets and apostles to climb Mount Everest, because you have to do spiritual warfare, you have to be where the evil spirit is. So they did an expedition to Mount Everest in the late 90s.
To do an exorcism?
And spent a week of prayer ministry to defeat who they named the Queen of Heaven on Mount Everest, so that evangelism could then proceed in Asia. Okay, so it's getting really weird.
Is this for real?
Yes, it is. Someone else has a dream, and in their dream, in his network, they dream that they see 7 mountains rising out of the ocean, and then God telling him that you need to take these 7 mountains for me.
Is this the 7 mountain theory?
Dominionism.
Yeah. That was a dream that one of his followers had. And then another one of his followers, who we've talked about before, we've talked about all these people, and I didn't realize they were all connected through Peter Wagner. Lance Wallnau, who also was the one who decided that Trump was a Cyrus figure and popularized that idea. He's also the one that brought the 7 mountain mandate idea to Peter Wagner, who then adopted it and then transmitted it to all the other prophets and apostles. And
this is a wiggly line.
It's a very wiggly line. So, like Dutch Sheets, who we've talked about before, was mentored by C. Peter Wagner. Lance Wallnau was mentored by C. Peter Wagner. Chuck Pierce in Texas was mentored by C. Peter Wagner. All these guys. Sean Foyt, the blonde-headed protest singer, is part of the circle of Peter Wagner fans. And so, as they're traveling around, so they go in very deep into Sean Foyt and those revival worship concerts that he was doing that were protest concerts, because this group started to believe that worship was a weapon, and that we're not just supposed to influence these 7 mountains. We're supposed to take them over. And to do that, we have to declare war. So a lot of war metaphors. So the Jericho marches were all from this group of prophets and apostles saying there's an evil spirit over the White House, over the Capitol, over America, and it's a spirit of Jezebel, which they've decided is a spirit of immorality.
Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She's been called, and Nancy Pelosi, who's been called a demon. So all of this talk of saving America and taking back America literally transformed into Frank Peretti, this present darkness. You know, we're fighting against powers and principalities. We're fighting against the prince of, the evil prince that's taken over America. A lot of it was linked then to abortion, because abortion, unlike any other sin, abortion is child sacrifice, and child sacrifice in the Bible was done to Baal. So abortion is opening the door to let demons back into America, which is why that's more important than anything else. So this is Eric Metaxas has fallen in with this group. He's interviewed most of these people on his show. They have their own, YouTube channels. They have their own conferences. The Revive America tour that General Flynn, Michael Flynn, is it Michael Flynn? Is that his name? Is doing. Is connected with that. So when he says, we can see a demonic portal has opened up over the White House, and if you are in the right frame of mind, you can see it with your naked eyes.
Just one thing that I'm thinking of as you're talking about this.
Yes.
When Frank Peretti's novel came out, I read it, and it was a wonderful,
exciting.
It was super exciting, and it did help me visualize this spiritual warfare battle that I do believe exists and that the Bible does talk about, but it specifies, exactly where these demonic things are and what they're doing, and I think that, inspires our imagination to do that. But interestingly enough, as you're talking about that, I'm reminded of the Fellowship Foundation in Washington, D.C. that my dad was a part of and I was loosely a part of. And there was that mentality there at the same time, which was we need to put Christian leadership in all of these places to bring Christian values and principles and turn these things around. So it's not just like that Pentecostal thing. No. There's that same idea.
It started as a dream that Bill Bright had on his way to a meeting with Lauren Cunningham, the founder of YWAM.
Yes.
And they had each had the same dream the night before, and it was about spheres of influence.
Yes.
So they came together and said, we need to really be strategic about putting Christians in positions where they can influence these 7 spheres. Mm-hmm. What Lance Wallnau and some of these prophets did was turn that upside down and say, no. And one of Dutch Sheets' innovations is that the word ecclesia doesn't just mean church, it means church as government. So we're called to
this guy
govern.
Is shaking his head. He's holding it in, Phil, but he's ready to explode.
So this is fun. So Bill Bright's concept of influencing spheres turned into Lance Wallnau's concept of taking mountains and ruling them top down for Jesus, dominion. So it's dominionism.
Well, so when they went up there to that Mount Everest, did things change?
They say they did. They say things changed after that.
Okay.
Yeah. So
and so now Asia's Christian?
Most of it, yeah. 80, 90%, I think, is
okay, good.
Christian, because there was this lady on top of Mount Everest, and we had to pray her down. We prayed her down. Now we're all good. So anyway, but here's the other thing I want to bring up about this. This was happening at the same time that Francis Schaeffer and Ronald Reagan were influencing. Basically, the religious right was being born. Mm-hmm. So is
Ralph Reed.
Ralph Reed, et cetera. So as this movement was happening and looking at everything in terms of spiritual warfare, and that's the big, everything is spiritual warfare. Everything is powers and principalities. All the things that were evidence of demons in America happened to be the same things that the religious right was against. So poverty was never a sign of demons in America. Racism was never a sign of demons in America. Drag queen story time, that's demons in America. Abortion is demons in America. LGBTQ issues, demons in America. So basically, everything that Jerry Falwell and James Dobson were against is now proof of demons, which is why the Democratic Party is now considered demonic in some Christian circles, because everything that we valued, we took our values from the Republican Party, and then whatever's the opposite of that is demonic. And that's why we can't compromise. We can't compromise because we'd be compromising with demons. And all the good biblical things are the things that the other party is against and the things that my party is for. And it's not just because we have a different point of view on what creates human flourishing. It's because they've been possessed with the spirit of Jezebel, and they're trying to bring down America to bring it under Satan. See where that could be a problem?
Only slightly. It totally, what I'm thinking about as I'm listening to you talk is truly our brains can justify anything. We can do whatever we want to do, and we can use Scripture to back it up and feel good about ourselves and bad about the enemy. And as long as we cloak it in this, war language, and we point to Scriptures that tell us it's true, we're good.
Yeah. So when you get Paula White praying that God would transfer angels from Africa to come help Trump stay in the White House, I say, where the heck did that come from? Well, it's because the whole thing is spiritual warfare. Everything is spiritual warfare. Demons are trying to get Trump out of the White House. We need angels to put him back in the White House.
Here's the thing. There is spiritual warfare. I don't think that that's not true. The Bible talks about that there are angels and principalities, and there are things that war with our souls. I mean, the Bible uses a lot of war language itself.
Just be careful when what you're picturing in your head is really this present darkness and not Scripture.
Yeah.
Right. So I've been working on some devotionals for next week, and I've used this metaphor a lot, but I often talk about how the Bible is a window; it's not a manual. And it's a window we look through, and through it we can see God clearly, and we can see the world clearly, and we can see, ourselves clearly. But the added metaphor I've been now toying with is the problem is some of us are looking through this window and we have glasses on that distort it, or we have a lens over our eyes that changes the color of it. And so you're right, Christian. Scripture does speak about spiritual powers and forces. The problem is we are looking at that through the lens of Frank Peretti, or through the lens of all the spiritual warfare nonsense we've been told for decades. And so when we come across those passages in the Bible, rather than reading what's actually there, we only see what we think we already know. And when you really boil it down, especially those texts in the New Testament that you often refer to with Paul, talking about warring against powers and principalities and all that, we immediately go to, he's talking about angels and demons and spiritual forces and their sword fighting in some weird dimension, whatever.
Flying with a car.
That is all 100% imported from our own cultural assumptions.
Hang on a second. There was a guy that was risen from the dead, and he passed through walls. And these people did see things that were strange and unusual. They saw angels sitting on rocks,
Yes, but they never saw angels with swords fighting each other with demons. That's never depicted
anywhere.
Angels
are messengers.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is we jump to those assumptions because popular Christian fiction and all this crap we've been hearing for decades.
But Revelation, Sky. But Revelation.
That's not there either.
There's a lot of bloodshed.
And a lot of it is metaphorical, and a lot of it is allegory, and a lot of it is symbols. And, we've been through that. We'll talk about that in a future episode coming up as well. But we read so much into it, and it's so much more comforting to believe that the problems in the world are all out external to me and my community. It's the other political party. It's that other group. It's those people. And that way we can paint the entire world as there are people and institutions with black hats and peoples and institutions with white hats. And it's an easy way to sell fear. And it's just, if I could extract two things from the American church and just cast them into the lake of fire, to use this demonic language, one would be dispensational eschatology and the other would be the spiritual warfare stuff. Because I think it has done way, way, way more damage than any good.
Sky.
And rather than looking at our own culpability in the way that we ourselves are subject to greed, jealousy, racism, pride, arrogance, all the other besetting sins, we don't look at that at all. We just look at, well, it's that political candidate or it's that group of people.
We even go so far as to say the devil made me do it, for lack of a better phrase. I mean,
But Sky, it's so much fun.
Exactly. It's fun and it's exciting and it makes me feel good that I know who the real bad guys are and I can feel self-righteous.
It's end times cosplay. We all want to dress up. And it just seems like guys that want to be in Lord of the Rings, I mean, it's like I need a sword, I want a horse, I want to be fighting in an epic battle and arguing about immigration policy or trying to find how to apply love of neighbor to this very tricky policy situation. It takes so much nuance and is so unsexy that I would much rather declare our White House has been overthrown by an evil spirit and we need to march around it 7 times blowing shofars and then getting Messianic Jews and Catholic priests to do an exorcism. Isn't that more exciting, Sky?
Well, it is, but it's so stupid. It's
Sky.
I mean, I'm sorry, it is. It fits again under this growing category of how stupid do you think God is? And let's boil this down to a really, really personal, simple metaphor.
Do it.
You have a husband and a wife who are in a very troubled marriage.
One turns her head and then he's
gone.
The
other one is gone.
I wish we'd all been ready.
Right. No, you have a marriage, a husband and wife, where it's just a really, really tumultuous, troubled marriage, right? The really easy, comfortable thing to do is to say, everything wrong in this marriage is 100% my spouse's fault. And all I need to do is get the demon out of my spouse and the marriage will be fixed. That diagnosis means it is compelling, but that diagnosis means I don't have to do any introspection. I don't have to own any responsibility. I don't have to look at anything that I might be responsible for in the breakdown of this relationship because it's entirely the other person. And oh, by the way, they're just a puppet for some demonic force. That's a wild oversimplification of what are usually very complicated human personal dynamics. And we know from reading the words of Jesus and the apostles and throughout Scripture that we have a calling to look at the log in our own eye, to deal with our own sin, to repent, to ask forgiveness, to do that self-reflective work. That's what being a healthy follower of Jesus requires. But suddenly when we take this into the cultural dynamic, it's, well, the church isn't the problem. We have nothing wrong. It's not us Christians. We don't have to do any reflection. We don't have to repent of anything. It's entirely those people. And we would never do that likely in a marriage relationship dynamic, but suddenly you blow it up onto the cultural level and my team is entirely good and innocent and those people are all the problem. And that's utterly unbiblical. And it's not what we're called to. And if we ever really want to see a transformation of our culture and society, it's not going to come because we've excommunicated or exorcised demons out of some other group. It's going to come when the church, those who claim to be followers of Jesus, do the hard work of repentance and confession themselves.
Do you know, Sky,
that's what will lead to renewal.
Do you know what the hard work is? Do you know what the hard work is? Climbing Mount Everest to pray away the Queen of Heaven, which I think is Mary, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't that a name for Mary? Queen of the universe. Mary, Queen of the universe, not Queen of Heaven. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, Sky, I did not even need to ask what the practical application is. You just threw it right on in there.
Boom.
Yeah, the practical application is take all those books and throw them into a fire. Not that I'm into book burning or anything, but it's like it is such a distraction from the call of Jesus. And talk about mountains, we make mountains out of molehills here where Scripture talks tangentially about some of these dynamics, but it's not the centerpiece. Just as it talks tangentially about eschatology, it's not the core of our faith. And we make these tangential sideshow issues into everything, and we miss what Jesus really emphasized, which is loving your neighbor and walking humbly with God and seeking justice and mercy and doing that self-reflective, transformative work of walking in step with the Spirit. That's the bullseye. why. And yet these other theologies cause us to completely ignore those things in order to emphasize what is non-essential.
But Sky, that stuff is boring. That's like monk stuff. That's like, I'm going to sit and pray and...
I think there's another element here that I was thinking of as you were saying this, Guy. There's part of us as Christians, I mean, we're like the frog in the water where the heat's getting turned up and we don't know we're boiling to death. We have no idea that that is deep in our DNA, that we've adapted these ideas and thoughts because we read a book back here or we listened to this thing or we went to this movie. We have no idea that's part of our cultural zeitgeist in our head. And so I think when we begin to feel like the world is out of control, let's take it down to a simple level. You know, there's these bad things happening in my life. Right now, I'm really struggling. What is going on? Clearly, the enemy is out to get me. Clearly, Satan wants to trip me up. Clearly, because we have to find some sort of reason that these bad things are happening. And I think we just don't even realize that that's part of who we are or what we've been taught. You know, praying away.
Yeah, you know, you're right. And it's often imperceptible. But we also have to ask the question, why is this what we've been taught? And you want to talk about principalities and powers. The real reason this is what we've been taught, it's what Phil said, is it's exciting and it sells. And we have been shaped by a Christian evangelical industrial complex that has to sell products to millions and millions of people and radio stations that have to get viewers or subscribers or listeners. And this kind of stuff gets people fired up and afraid and excited. And that's why these...
And buying products.
Exactly. And the antidote to that is supposed to be Christian leaders in local churches who are preaching the scriptures. And as we've seen over the decades, that has happened less and less. Churches are less engaged. People are attending less and less. They're also driven by market forces, and there isn't a huge audience for the message that Jesus is really preaching and presenting. But there is a huge audience for Christian nationalism and, you know, Seven Mountain Dominionism and all this kind of stuff. And it takes over because it's what the people want. And so we've been subject to the principalities and powers of market forces and capitalism as they've infiltrated the church and given us messages that we want rather than the message of Christ that we need. That needs to be exercised, not some queen on Mount Everest.
You preach it, brother.
But we brought her down, Sky. She fell.
We did the balloon.
Clearly.
I think we're
she's in 6 pieces over a 6-mile area. We need to go clean her up.
I think we've basically created Comic-Con for conservative Christians, and we all just want to do end times cosplay and dress up as our favorite characters and, take it to the devil. We all want to take it to the devil in a way that doesn't actually involve looking at our neighbors.
I think there's a sense of helplessness that people feel. They feel like they're helpless. They can't affect what they feel needs to happen in power, whether it's changing laws or rules. And so they have to find some way to take control or something that they can do. And I think that plays into that desire to want to believe all of that stuff. That's this helpless, I'm afraid, driven by fear. Everything's out of my control. Well, at least I can pray and with my mind.
Right. And what's interesting is that this sort of thinking has spread partly because of people disconnecting from their local churches and finding their faith community on Facebook or on YouTube, because it's so much easier to bump into this kind of content electronically. It's probably not going to pop up at your local Lutheran church or your local, Southern Baptist church or your local Catholic church. It's not going to pop up there. It's going to pop up in your news stream and on Twitter, and then you're going to watch a video. And all of these guys were doing, in between the election and the Capitol riots, we're doing daily videos about, the spiritual warfare of returning Trump to the White House. So millions of people started tuning in to all of that online ecosystem where there's no denominational oversight, there's no religious authority involved at all. It's a group of apostles and prophets who are apostles and prophets because they have named each other as such. It is a self-elevating issue, movement, and then it's spread electronically without involving your local pastor in any way because you don't listen to your local pastor anymore. You're watching your Facebook feed. So it's kind of perfectly created for the moment we're in, where people haven't lost the religious impulse, but they've lost the impulse to associate with a local body of believers.
Because that requires some level of sacrifice.
And intentionality. Being in community is hard. It's hard to go every week and be in relationship with a group of people that are different than you. It's a lot easier to stay at home and watch it on your iPad.
I want to watch the end times on TV. That's my engagement with Jesus Christ. Okay. Well, yes, so, Guy.
Where do you think this goes? Like, do we become so overwhelmed with this stuff, and they're proven over and over and over again to be full of crap because all their prophecies don't come true? And do people just burn out on it and we get used to it and it's kind of disappears? Or does this
is the new way
more? What worries me is even if it's always just a tiny minority of people who really buy into this stuff, we saw on January 6th and at other times what happens when they take it seriously. I mean, they could do an enormous amount of damage when their so-called spiritual warfare becomes warfare in the streets.
Yeah, and I am concerned about people that get involved in this movement just basically propagate the values of the Republican Party under the heading of spiritual warfare. So, whatever post-Reagan conservatives have been against, that's what is demonic. Whatever post-Reagan conservatives have been for, that's godly and biblical. And there's just no ability to self-critique and say, am I lining up my values according to the Bible or according to the Republican Party? And even worse, am I elevating partisan politics in the U.S. to the level of spiritual warfare in the universe? Because that is just toxic. So how we oppose that, I'm not sure. Maybe we should do a podcast and talk about it.
Well, one thing I would love to educate people on is I would love for consumers to be a little bit more savvy about what they're consuming on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube or whatever, and realize that whoever has a channel, if they have a lot of followers, more than 1,000 and more than 4,000 hours watched, they can begin monetizing their channels. And so people that are building their content and marketing to you in a certain way, they are making profit, and it has become a business that operates so silently that most people aren't even aware of it. And I think it is important for us to become, informed, intelligent consumers of media. Who is feeding us the stuff we're taking in? Yeah. And why are they feeding it to us? And why are we eating it without thinking about it?
By the way, we were considering talking about the recent split. Oh, I have a light that's flashing on and off all of a sudden. That's exciting. Can you see that? No, you can't see that. Oh, just one of my lights is freaking out. Okay. Oh, that's spiritual warfare.
Clearly.
Oh my gosh.
We know the demons live within electronics.
Dang it.
Well, when my great-grandfather was going to preach on the radio, some other pastors in town reached out to him and said, do not preach on the radio because the Bible says Satan is the prince of the airwaves, prince of the air. If he's the prince of the air, that means radio is Satan's domain. Don't preach on the radio. And someone else said, no, we need to use... Another pastor reached out to him and said, we need to use this new technique to communicate. And he listened to that pastor and then preached on the radio for 40 years. Anywho, there is a national prayer breakfast that this year split into two, one inside the Capitol and one outside at the Hilton. And there's lots of talk about why, is because it was associated with the foundation. What is that the name of the group? What is the group?
So, yeah.
The fellowship.
It's the fellowship. And so basically, it did start a long time ago with the guys that you were talking about. And the fellowship developed as this kind of secret group in Washington that was wanting to influence, people of power. And so they bought these big, huge places, and they would bring leaders from all over the world, and they would give them a retreat, particularly if leaders were in trouble and wanted to hide, and they would minister to them. And they would,
a little sketchy right there.
Share them with Jesus, and then out of kind of this developed the prayer breakfast. And the prayer breakfast started happening in February every year, and it's been going on, ever since the 80s. And I do think they split it up. This split between having two locations has happened over COVID. It kind of started during that time. It's not just this year. But
this
also,
is official, and they moved it away from the fellowship so that it's now a new nonprofit.
Yeah, it's a new nonprofit
that's running it.
And some of that may have to do with the family series that came out.
Yeah, painted was that on an HBO series?
It was on Netflix.
Yeah, we did an episode with John Fia where he talked about it.
That's right.
So we'll go back and figure out what that was.
So the reason I brought that up near the end of the show is that there was actually a third event that happened about the same time that was at the Bible Museum. And it included people like Michelle Bachmann and Tony Perkins, some other very conservatives. But most of the people who appeared there were prophets and apostles from the New Apostolic Reformation. Many of the same people that did the Jericho marches. The big Jericho march was emceed by our friend Eric Metaxas, and everyone blew shofars and tried to make Satan fall down out of the White House. Anyway, they held their own prayer breakfast event at the Bible Museum at the same time. So that's, and there were a number of former or current congressmen who showed up to blow a shofar and say hi.
Is this the future of the National Prayer Breakfast, that there's just going to be all these different prayer breakfasts all over town with different factions based on their political or theological
there was the
alignment?
Whole issue of the Russian spy that had got, it's actually always happened where, everybody was kind of hobnobbing and talking out of the channels of
there was
power.
a lot of lobbying going on because there were 2,000 people in a ballroom with tons of senators and the President of the United States. So if you could get an invitation, you could do some business. And the fact that the Russians tried to get 60 or 70 people there last year or the year before is,
And it wasn't just the prayer breakfast. There were days of events on either side of the prayer breakfast.
True.
So it was a big deal.
It was like Prayapalooza. It was big.
Prayapalooza.
Yeah.
And it's been growing. I mean, it was growing like that every year. It just got more and more the place to be because, the centers of power all showed up at this time and in this place from not just in the United States, but from other places. So there was open ears.
Yeah.
It was a free-for-all.
Why are we so drawn to power, Sky? Because Jesus wants us to take over the mountains.
Right.
Is that why? So it's a natural, healthy, God-honoring desire to pursue great power.
The prayer breakfast is where the incident occurred that we talked about years ago where the Dalai Lama asked me about my breakfast and I lied to him. If you remember that.
Yeah.
Right. I love that story. That's a great story.
Like even at my little table, not little, but I don't know, there were 8 or 10 of us at the table. There were multiple countries represented. Some people from administrations of foreign governments were there and different religion. Not everybody was a Christian at my table. There were Muslims as well. And you just realize this event draws a huge number of power brokers. And it's like you said, Christian, you have a lot of powerful people all in the same place at the same time. It's going to attract nefarious activity. It ceases to be about prayer and becomes much more about power and politics. And so in a way, I think it's kind of a good thing that they're rebooting it.
Very true.
There you go. Okay. Thanks, y'all, for stopping by. It's been fun talking to you, as always. Thank you to our Patreon supporters. There's new stuff on Patreon this week, so show up and watch it. There's new stuff every week. We're posting new stuff on Patreon, inside, back behind the scenes. Christian Asks, Caitlin schools Sky on things that she learned at Duke. I think that's the name of that show.
Something like that.
Getting Schooled with Caitlin.
Yeah, at Duke. Go Blue Devils. Hey, we can't support devils. Spiritual warfare.
Right.
Spiritual warfare.
Hey, we should mention that Esau McCauley's book for the book club is now available on Lent, which you talked to him about last episode. And now people who are part of our Patreon supporters can get a free copy of the book and read it together.
That's fantastic. Yeah. That's fantastic.
And by the way, we should also mention, if you haven't tried With God Daily Devotional, you really should. He's been doing this amazing series on heaven. I've had people text me and be like, oh my gosh, is this really true? I've never thought about heaven this way before. It really is, pretty challenging and educational and also reflective devotional.
Thank you, Christian.
Highly recommend it. You're welcome.
Fantastic. Okay, we will be back later this week in 2 days with an exciting interview, and then back again next week with more news. And we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Holy Post Media. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele, and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much more.